Hey guys, thanks for checking out this video. I'm Lauren with In-Depth Sonar, and today we're going to be talking about buying a used fish finder or other marine electronics. Now, I'm not going to be talking about buying something like this old Lowrance for $1.50 at a garage sale. A unit like this doesn't belong on a boat anymore, it belongs on a mantle. But instead, we're going to be going through the things you need to look out for and think about when buying a unit that's 1 or 2 generations behind what's currently out there. With supply chain breakdowns right now, new inventory can be hard to get, so you may be forced to look for something used, even if it's just a temporary solution. The first part of this video is going to deal with the physical evaluation of the unit, which may seem like super obvious things for you to look at. So if you get bored with that, just skip ahead to the next section where we're going to get into more technical tips. And those sections are outlined in the description of the video. So let's get to it. So the first thing we want to do is obviously a physical examination of the unit. Places that we see where the unit may have been nicked or scratched. There's a couple scratches on this one under here, which isn't a big deal. There's a bit of a chunk out of the case just above my thumb there. Again, not a big deal. We kind of want to make sure around the tops, the sides, the edges, anywhere on the front face, that there's no major impact marks, or also obviously on the screen as well. Now there's some less obvious things we want to look at as well. Most units are sealed up with a gasket. Just run your finger along it, make sure it's not sticking out or pinched in, make sure it's not cut anywhere, so there's an area where water could get in. So that's our gasket. Then on the back of the unit, we want to look for signs of the unit being opened. Now to open a unit up, you have to take off the nuts that are on all the connectors, and then you have to take off all these little screws around here, which are Torx bits. First, with the Torx bits, a lot of people use different head bits that strip those out. So just look at each one, make sure it's not stripped out. The other thing too is these nuts. A lot of people don't use a socket to take them off when they're trying to open up their unit. They'll use pliers, and you'll see marks all around the casing and on the nut. Truth is, in most cases, just some finger pressure will crack all of those. The outside ones can be a little harder, and you almost have to push the 2 cases together to crack them, but that's all you need to do. So if you ever want to get into your unit without anyone knowing, probably finger tight is all you need. Another thing on these Lowrance units is this guy right here. This is used for some reason in manufacturing. A lot of people think this is an access port to get into the unit for some crazy secret feature, or I don't know what else. But you'll see that these are all tore up. Sometimes they're missing. If it's missing, water's gonna get into the unit and you're gonna have big problems. Another thing too to think about is just your gimbal knobs. Are the brass threaded inserts in here working properly? Has somebody cross-threaded them before? You can double check that by just threading both knobs on, do it on both sides to ensure that we don't have any problems there. And then what kind of condition is the gimbal knob in? You can see this one's all tore up because someone used vice grips because it was over tightened. So again, that could possibly be a sign of damaged threads. Double check that. All these teeth here, make sure they're intact as well, so your gimbal bracket has something to bite to. Now, speaking of the gimbal bracket, you want to make sure that these plastic inserts with the teeth are not missing and that everything is good on those ones as well. Now, this seems something like, well, why can't I just buy another gimbal bracket? Well, maybe there's parts not available any longer for your unit. When we get to the back of the unit, we can inspect all the pins and all the sockets. Make sure in the sockets there's no broken pins, and in the pin connectors there's no broken pins. Also check all of them for corrosion. Also check for bent pins. A lot of times you can re-straighten them out, but it's just something that could weaken over time, so we want to avoid that if possible. Take a look at all the connectors that go into these pins. If you're buying any accessories, make sure there's no corrosion or damage to those as well. On the front of the unit as well, make sure that your card door mechanism works, and make sure that there's a gasket there to keep the memory card in there. Also, if there's a memory card in there, make sure that the ejection system works. Make sure there's no corrosion. And when we turn it on, we'll test that this works as well. So after we get all those basic physical things out of the way, what we want to do is take a look that the unit powers up. Again, that's a very obvious thing, but making sure that the unit completely turns on is important, not just hanging up on a splash screen. But the other thing we can do once the unit turns on is see if there's any damage to the screen. It'll show any cracks, any missing pixels, any discoloration. But there's a few other things you want to take a look at as well. Take a look at the corners of your screen. That's typically where you're going to see any bubbling. This is something that kind of looks like a little water droplet behind the screen. Those problems only get worse. So if you do notice that, that would be a unit probably to stay away from. Once it powers up, we can just basically take a look first thing at the screens here. And I like to put it onto a Sonar screen with a white background, and that will show me any pixels that are dead. They'll just be little black dots here and there if you have them. Then what you can do is change the color palette to a darker background, and then we'll see if there are any pixels that maybe are lit up constantly. So you'll see little white dots or other colored dots. So that'll indicate any problems you may have with the screen. So another thing I like to do when I first turn the unit on, if the unit has the capability, is turn the key beeps on. So now anytime we press a key, we're gonna get a beep. And we can go ahead and test all the keys now. I like to have the beeps on because then it's audible. So pages, we were already there, we know that that works. We'll then hit pages again. It'll take us to our split screen combo here where we're on the map screen, and we'll test that we can zoom in, we can zoom out, we can move the cursor all different directions. So all the arrow keys work. We can hit X to get out. We can hit menu, and then we can scroll down to the menu. We can hit enter to select. We can also change pages with the pages button. Now our menu changed to the Sonar because we flipped over Sonar here. We can save a waypoint. So that button is working even though we can't do it because there's no position fix. And then our power button's working. And while we're in the power button, we can also cycle the backlight just by pressing it. The next thing I like to do is just go to the full chart and then just touch different areas of the screen to make sure that I do have a screen that is calibrated. This is important because if you want to save a waypoint on a very specific piece of structure, you're going to be able to really pinpoint where that waypoint goes. And that's exactly what you want to be able to do, like that. Now, if for some reason the screen isn't calibrated and you're touching here and the cursor showing up elsewhere or above your finger, just hopefully you know the calibration process and you'll be able to do that on the particular unit you're looking at and then test it again. It's not uncommon for things to get out of calibration from time to time, so I wouldn't worry about it too much if you had a unit like that. So now that we know the unit's fairly well working, for the most part, no issues there, we can go and check our software, and we go into system and about or software information. So we're version 18.2. So we can then go to the Lowrance website in this case, or whatever other brand you're looking at, and check the latest version for the particular unit you're purchasing. Now, if it's not updated, one thing you're gonna wanna make sure that's working is the memory card slot. And the easiest way we can do that is just with the mapping there. So if there's no map included with the unit you're buying, bring a map card or another micro SD card with you. So I pulled it out of this slot. It was obviously working in that slot. We'll put it in this slot and make sure that slot's working. So you can see that slot actually picked up the mapping card, but did not pick up any of the mapping detail, whereas this one does. So there could be some type of problem there. Now, the other thing too, you shouldn't be doing this while the unit's powered on. But if I ran into a case like this, I would probably power the unit off, make sure that that mapping card was actually working, and then try it again. And also just make sure that you can eject the card the way you're supposed to by just pushing it in to make sure that that mechanism is working as well. Going right along with the GPS, the question mark in the arrow indicates we don't have a GPS fix. So what we want to do, and this test we'll do outside, because if we do it inside here, we're going to not get any reading because the GPS signal cannot go through the roof. But what we want to look for on the satellite status page is, are these bars filling in? And the higher they are, the better. And then also, are these dots locking on to satellites? Those are the satellites around you, and this is the signal strength that's coming from those satellites. So those are two things you want to do, and obviously it has to be done in an area with a very clear view of the sky, not next to a building, not just outside a garage, but in a very open area to test it properly. And when you're doing that, the EPE, which is measured in feet here, that's something you want to take a look at as well. If it's anything over 20 to 30 feet, there's an issue for some reason. You should be getting less than an estimated position error of 20 feet. If you're getting a couple hundred feet, there's definitely a problem somewhere. Going along with the GPS thing, want to make sure we have maps. You know, in this case, there is a map card in it, but if we zoom out, we can see what that map card covers. So while the previous owner may have fished this lake, you want to make sure that the lake you're going to be fishing is going to be covered on that card, or you might have to purchase another card. So I zoom all the way out, or at least until I can see the area I'm going to be using it. And let's say I'm going to be down in Tennessee or Kentucky, in that area. Well, this case here, this unit has maps for all over Canada and a little bit in upstate New York and Vermont here, but I have nothing for down here. So I want to make sure, are there a compatible map that I can purchase for this unit for my area? A lot of the older Garmin units especially, you can't get maps for anymore for your particular area. So you definitely have to watch that. Even some older Lowrance and Hummingbirds that won't run these new Navionics Plus cards are going to run into that issue. So make sure that one, you have mapping available for your area, and then two, if there is mapping available for your area, that your unit can handle it. A lot of the maps now come on 16 gigabyte cards because we have so much detail. You can see we're getting into 1 foot contour detail on most lakes now. A lot of the older units, even Gen 2 Helix units, Gen 2 Lowrance unit, Hook Lowrance units, they can't run these bigger cards without deleting some of the mapping. So there's a bit of a process involved there to get mapping to work. So make sure you do the research and know all those things before you go in. Okay, after GPS, we're going to look at the sonar features. And a couple things we can do here. We really want to test the sonar in the water. So I've got an ice fishing transducer hooked up here just for demonstration purposes. One thing you can do is test to see if you can hear a pulse or if you even feel a pulse coming off that transducer while it's plugged in and out of the water. Now it may be erratic where it's 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, and then that may speed up a faster 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Those are just kind of some things that you'll run into out of the water. That's not uncommon, but just if you can feel or hear that pulse, that's a good thing. The other thing is looking up at our surface clutter. So changing the range, getting it down to a shorter range or shallower range. This here is where there was no transducer plugged in. This is where there was a transducer plugged in. If we're not getting any clutter, that means we're getting nothing from our transducer. If we are getting some clutter up here, that means we're getting a signal from our transducer. Now, if we are in a scenario where we can't test it in the water, what we can try and do, test it on land through the air. And you want a hard surface, like concrete is the best. In this case, I've got a countertop and I'm just lifting the transducer up. I'm about a foot off of the countertop right now. And you can see I'm at about 5 feet here. As I move it closer, it gets shallower. As I move it up, it gets further away. So this is telling me it is working fairly well. It's typically gonna read about 3 times the distance that you're holding it off the object to what the actual depth is showing up here. So I'm about a foot, maybe a foot and a half away, and I'm getting like 5-6 feet. So that's pretty typical as to what you're gonna see if you're testing it out of the water. So if you're getting readings like this is a really good test to do to see if you will get a reading. Now, one thing I will say with an ice fishing transducer with a really flat bottom, it's easy. With rounded transducers, you might just have to move it a little bit, very, very little, until you get a reading. As soon as you get a reading, try and hold it as steady as you can. And that's going to be your best way to test this out of the water. Testing the structure scan is a little bit harder. We really can't do as much there. In this case, I have no structure scan transducer plugged in, and I'm getting a very thin band down the side. If we go into the menu here and change it to down, again, we're getting no surface clutter. So like we talked about, that's typical of obviously having no transducer plugged in, or if a transducer is plugged in, the unit or the transducer being defective. If we have a thicker band here, again, like the surface clarity, that's a good indication that it's working. Now, as far as service goes on the unit, typically the manufacturers only offer warranty to the first user, but some are offering longer warranties now where you will actually be in a scenario, if buying a used unit, there might be warranty left. One trick you can try is, you don't have your bill of sale for it, but ask them by the serial number, which is on the back of the unit, when was this purchased? And then ask if they can give you the warranty until 2 years from that date or whatever the warranty would be. So it's always a good idea to buy a unit that has a serial number sticker on it, not one that's taken off. And then also understand how the manufacturer's warranty works. Lowrance has their 5-year warranty, as they call it, and are often market it, but it's actually not. It's a 1 or 2 year warranty, and then year 4 to 5 or 3 to 5, those you pay for a replacement, and then after that, there's no service. So finding a brand that does repairs on their product may, in 2-3 years, a unit that is out of warranty, that's no longer replaceable, they may still be able to repair it, and you don't have to buy another unit. So looking into the service side of it is a good idea. Now, I mentioned in the beginning about the gimbal bracket and why you want to inspect every little detail. Parts availability is getting harder now for older models. There's a lot of supply chain issues right now. So what you need to do is ensure that parts are available for your unit. And when I say parts, I'm more meaning accessories, gimbal knobs, gimbal brackets, power cables, transducers, all those types of things. So doing a little bit of research up front is a good thing when you're going into buying a used unit. So here's some closing thoughts for you on buying a used unit. I think if you do these tests, go through all the different aspects of the unit to ensure everything's working, you're probably going to be okay. If you find any issues with the units, know the key sequence hard or soft resets, or go into the menu and know how to do resets on the different models. So that will then allow you to try the unit again fresh. I prefer not to do this when I first get to a unit. I want to see if there's any problems with it first, and then do this to see if it resolves any issues. And my final tip for you is to bring a battery with you. Make sure you can power it up. Any 12-volt battery will work for you for the most part. If you have a home security system, there's probably a backup battery in there that you could steal. Nice and small batteries, same batteries we use for ice fishing to power the units up portably. I think the biggest mistake you can make when buying a used unit is not powering it up and not testing it before you make the deal. Hopefully this video helps you out in buying a used unit and showing you what to look for and some tips and tricks to hopefully avoid any problems you might have. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and check out the other videos like this one I just posted on tips on how to buy a new unit. So if used isn't for you, you want to take a look at buying a new unit, this video is the one to take a look at and go through a whole sales process, what you need to think about to make sure you get the right unit for you. A lot of the tips in this video will also apply to used units, so be sure to watch that video before you do your research on what used unit is right for you.